Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the August 2022 Compassion Chat. Thanks for joining us this evening. My name is Susan Marshall. I am the author of Mom's Gone Missing, When a Parent's Changing Life Upends Yours, and we know it does, and also your host for Compassion Chats. We meet the fourth Tuesday of every month right here on Zoom, 6 p.m. Central. You don't have to get dressed up. If you want to have a cup of tea, a cocktail, maybe have some dinner while you're here with us, you're absolutely welcome to do that. We bring in some really, really cool people each month talking about what it's like in the caregiver role with Alzheimer's and dementia patients, loved ones, right? I don't like calling them patients, and from all walks of life, backgrounds. Our goal here with Compassion Chats is to introduce you not only to some really smart, accomplished people, but to meet them as humans. One of the things that I struggled with when I cared for my parents was not knowing who to call. And even if I didn't know Alzheimer's Association, for example. I knew that would be a resource. I didn't know who I would ask for. I didn't know what to ask. So our goal here is to introduce you to people, to have chats, not formal presentations, although we do cover pretty interesting stuff, so that you too can feel comfortable picking up the phone, making a contact, sending an email. So these sessions are recorded. So if you've joined us and you don't want to be on camera, see ya. But please also mute yourself for the first part of this chat. We will open it up, as we always do, for questions, comments, stories, what have you. We are very, very blessed this evening to be joined by Ann Brewer. I met Ann, 8 months ago or so. Ann is a nurse.
It's been a year.
Has it been? Probably, probably has been that long. But anyway, we met a while ago. Ann is a nurse by training. She has a phenomenal background, including 14 years at the National Institutes of Health in Washington, D.C. She is compassionate by nature and has cared for, I couldn't even begin to count the numbers. And thank you so much for joining us this evening. We are privileged, truly, to have you with us.
Well, thank you for having me. And, I do have a lot of experience with Alzheimer's. And, I think maybe something I'd like to start with is that, first off, I'm going to say I was adopted. So all of these experiences were with my adoptive family. And Alzheimer's ran rampant in both my mom and dad's families. My paternal grandparents had what they call hardening of the arteries, but they both had dementia of some type, which after finding out, as the years go on, it's kind of pretty obvious that they had Alzheimer's. My other grandmother was a little bit younger than they were. And so by the time she started showing signs of dementia, they said it was probable Alzheimer's. They, of course, couldn't come up with a definitive diagnosis.
And just pause just for a second. They said it was probable Alzheimer's?
Right, because they can't diagnose, they still can't absolutely diagnose it, but all the signs were there. As time goes on, they've been able to actually take cognitive tests of people with dementia and Alzheimer's. And there is a difference. Can I tell you what that absolute difference is? No. But there are tests that they do. There's normal aging, and then there's Alzheimer's. And then there's dementia. But then my father, and I guess the reason I say that my grandparents probably had Alzheimer's was that actually my aunt was diagnosed. She was younger than my father. She was diagnosed with early onset dementia or Alzheimer's, and she was in her early 60s, and I think she lived to be middle 70s. My father was diagnosed after she was, and I guess the story about my dad is that I can tell you is that when he was, my mom died. I talked him into selling the house and moving into an apartment, which was a big adjustment for him. And then I kind of watched over him. I'd go visit him every couple of weeks, once a month, whatever I needed to do, because I was in Madison and he was in Richmond Center. And every time I came to his apartment, it got dirtier and dirtier and just, I'm a clean freak. So I would clean his place, but it kept getting more difficult and more difficult. I think the final straw was he was in a hit and run accident. Thank God nobody was hurt badly. The other person's car was very, very damaged. His car was not damaged much, but he got out of the car and said, "Oh, sorry, I gotta go. I gotta go home and go to the bathroom." He didn't even have the sense that it was something that he should hang on and wait for the police to arrive. So shortly thereafter, I got him into an appointment with a gerontologist. She did cognitive testing and said, "Carol, you have Alzheimer's." Now, just because of the cognitive test, obviously there's no blood test or anything else, but that's what she said he had. And she also advised, what she didn't advise, she said, you can't drive anymore. Well, then I had no choice. I had to move him out of the apartment. I moved him to an assisted living facility. And guess what? He lasted less than a year there. I received a call saying that he was on top of the roof at the facility. So that meant I had to go forth and find a memory care unit for him, which I did. And, I could go on hours and tell you just bizarre stories about my dad. I think, you kind of all know those stories. It's hard, it's tough. It's a debilitating disease. It's kind of a devastating disease it is a devastating disease for all those people who are involved. Unfortunately, I did have a brother and sister, but they were minimally involved. So it was pretty much me taking care of him. And it took him a long time to decline, but by the time he died, he was speaking gibberish. He didn't know me. I'll just add this really kind of funny thing is my dad was always a male chauvinist pig. And once I was
product of his age, and he was a product of his time.
I know, but nevertheless, and I can laugh about this because of course I'm not surprised. I met a guy, we got engaged, and that's my husband of today. And so I would have him go with me to the nursing home. And my dad latched on to him. He didn't even look at me anymore. Not that he could talk words, but he talked things, blah, 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 blah. But anyway, he never looked at me. He just thought Bob was, just perfect. So anyway, that's kind of the story of where I was going with that. So, do you want me, Susan, to go into kind of why? Well, that's obviously a reason why I was interested in Alzheimer's.
Absolutely. Yeah. So what really brought you from the nursing that you did? Was that general nursing? Did you specialize? I don't really know much about the nursing field.
I was pretty much always in critical care, but then I did some home care because I always had to have patient care. So I did home care. I know, basically though, I have to say, it was critical care. One of the things I did, and this is really funny, but it was really my favorite job at that point, and that was I was the female health coordinator for the Wisconsin Department of Corrections. That was fun because I got to educate people. I didn't have anybody with dementia. Well, maybe some people would say some people had dementia in the system, but no, it was the whole education and helping these poor women. So anyway, that's kind of my background.
And you have a tremendous interest in research. Was that a product of the NIH years?
That was absolutely a product. I didn't really know much about research until I started working at the NIH, and I worked in the director's office. So I had a lot of firsthand knowledge of what was going on with research. And I also, because of my dad's and my whole family's Alzheimer's history, I really wanted to kind of find out about their research with Alzheimer's. And I got to kind of be good friends with their communications director, and I, got to be good friends with the director of the National Institute on Aging, Richard Hodis. And so I just kind of watched their research. And then when they found out that I was moving to Wisconsin, which was just really cool, they said, "Oh, you've got to look into the University of Wisconsin Alzheimer's Disease Research Center. They're one of our best centers. I mean, they really do wonderful research there." So I was kind of excited to do some research about that, but I really didn't have to do much research about it because in our condo building, there was a couple that was telling me about the fact that they were in research studies with the ADRC. And I thought, oh, and so I told them of my interest with research and my history with NIH. And they also told me about this organization, the Initiative to End Alzheimer's Disease, which is supported by the University School of Medicine and Public Health. I always say I don't have Alzheimer's if I can say that. So anyway, I was quickly invited to join that group. And so that's where I started with IEA. And
well, that's how we met. That's how we met, right?
That's actually how we met. Yes.
And invited me to join that board.
Yeah, I was going to tell you that. I mean, I actually talked 3 of my friends into joining. Susan, thank you very much. You've been such a great addition to the group. And Nancy Arnold, who is a nurse advocate and also has done a lot of work with dementia patients, especially over the last 10 or 12 years after she retired from her real job as a practicing nurse. And then let's see, also Michelle Bulmer, who I met in our condo building, that both parents had Alzheimer's and died of that disease, but she was a school advocate and teacher. So I thought, boy, she knows the advocacy world and she knows Alzheimer's. So I think she would be a great addition to the group.
Well, and your leadership of the group, Ann, was really important in terms of growing not only that group, but helping us, in my experience with you and with that group, just helping us kind of put our feet on the ground and recognize that it's world-renowned research, but it's really dealing with our populations that we know people, just as you said. And what that did for me as part of this really smart group of people is saying, you know what, this is going to touch us all at some point, and maybe ourselves. So we're going to get to your participation in the study, which I find incredibly courageous.
It was funny because I kind of pushed a few buttons of people that were researchers, but were the advisors for the IEA. And I think it's really important to be part of a research study if you are part of the IEA. So I, nudged them and I said, is there any way I can join a clinical trial or a research study? And they said, well, yeah, I guess we could let you in on it's ADRC. What is it called? I'm trying to think of exactly what it is. Let me see. I might have it written down here somewhere.
The study
matter. Well, it was a study, but it's a longitudinal study. And what happens with that is that you go in and you are given a physical and neurological exam, EKG, and then they do what they call cognitive testing. It's a 6-hour first appointment, and it can be very harrowing going through all those cognitive tests, because I would say they took like 3 to 4 hours. Thank God they let me have a few breaks while we were going through this. And now what I do is I just go in once a year, and for that 5 or 6 hour time, and they do the same thing, check and see if I've declined over the last year or not. They don't tell you if you've declined, so it's kind of a scary thing. Oh, did I decline? Did I not decline? I don't know.
Well, that's, what's interesting to me about that, Ann, and we've talked several times. What made you take that step? Matt LePay was our guest last month, and he was phenomenal, of course. And I asked him, so Matt, are you going to join a study? He's like, yeah, no, I'm too chicken. And I said the same thing. You know what? It's fascinating to me. but there has to be a level of anxiety, particularly, I didn't realize it was hours of the cognitive testing. That had to just be anxiety producing to begin with.
Of course, I had a glass of wine right after I got home after these days. So it was terribly, it is because you think you're failing. But what reason that I have to say that I became involved in that study was because of my total belief in research. And if this can help somebody and if it can advance the science, that is really important. But that study is kind of, it's very mild. Then a new study came out called the AHEAD study. And this study
What was
is,
it called?
pardon?
What was it called?
AHEAD, AHEAD. Does it stand for something? No. It's big, they're all big letters, and the acronym doesn't, it isn't an acronym, I guess. So anyway, it took a while to have that study get off the ground, but when it did, they did agree to put me through the testing period just to see if I would qualify for the test. And what they did in that is that you have to qualify, and there's certain things I'll tell you about. But anyway, you have to have an MRI, you have to have 2 PET scans, one that will measure amyloid in your brain, the other one tau. This particular study has only to do with amyloids. You go through a physical exam, you go through a neurological exam, EKG, you name it, you go through everything. And of course, there is the cognitive test again. So
Hours? Was that 1 hours long as well?
It was probably 4 hours. Yeah. And you would think I'd memorized the test by now, but unfortunately I haven't. So I think they change them up all the time. So anyway, I thought, because, can I back up a little bit and say that I did find my birth family in my 50s. And I found that nobody had Alzheimer's. But the other thing I found out is that they all, including my mother, my father, and my full sister, all died in their mid-60s with heart disease, diabetes, and all of my mom's brothers and sisters died in their 50s and 60s. In fact, my mother, who actually died, I think, at 67, was the oldest one of that generation. They just didn't live old enough to be, the only way they would have been diagnosed with Alzheimer's is if they would have had a early onset. And so my fears were not allayed by that. I did have, I think, an unnatural fear of Alzheimer's, probably because of what I saw, in my earlier adult life with all of my relatives. It was scary. So there's 2 reasons I joined this study. Number one, I've already told you about, and that is how important research is and how important it is to advance the science. And like you said, this is something that everybody is probably going to experience, either with a loved one or possibly themselves. The other reason, of course, was totally selfish. Because what they were doing was testing a drug, lecanemab, and I can never say it right, but I think that's pretty close to it. And it's a drug that they believe will be like little Pac-Man in your brain and eat the amyloids. So I thought, okay, I'll go through this screening and I'll see if there's, what's going on. And so, I had all these tests, and then I was called in to have my results. And I forgot one thing. The other thing they do is they do take blood, and there is genetic risk for Alzheimer's, and that is called the Apoe gene. And your mother gives you one, your father gives you one. And there are Apoe2s, Apoe3s, and Apoe4s. the APO2s seem to be, in fact, they even say they might be protective against Alzheimer's. There's APO3s, which are neutral, may or may not. APO4s give you a preponderance towards Alzheimer's. So anyway, getting back to going in and seeing the.
And if I can pause you there just for a second, does everybody have those APO 2, 3, or 4?
Yes.
So we all have it somewhere in our genetic makeup.
Right. You
Okay.
have to have, it's just one of those genes that you get. And it's, obviously not that bad unless you've got APO4s, especially if you have 2 copies of APO4s. So I was called in to get my results. I brought my husband with me because it can be kind of a result, when they tell you. And so I do have an elevated amount of amyloids in my brain.
So pause button again. Tell us what the amyloid is. It's a plaque.
Oh, I'm sorry. It's a plaque. It's a protein that they have associated with Alzheimer's disease. If you have amyloids in your brain, do you necessarily get Alzheimer's? No. Sometimes people that don't have any amyloids do get Alzheimer's. But almost everybody, if you do have amyloids, you don't necessarily get Alzheimer's. So that's why they're studying now. I mean, they're not absolutely sure, but they're kind of sure that one of the causative factors is amyloids.
And that plaque builds up in your brain. Does it build up in any other parts of your body, or do we not know? We're just focused.
We're focusing on the brain, but I don't think that it does.
Okay.
And so, excuse me.
So Apoe gene we have amyloid plaque can build up. And then there's a third element, I think, to the study that you were talking about as well, right?
Okay, it's a tau. These are tau tangles, and it's little kind of strings in the brain. And they're not doing any research on, well, they probably are, I just don't know about it, research on the drugs that might affect that. But you never hear about the actual, if there are any drugs at all. So, okay. As I said, I had elevated amyloids, and to be qualified for this test or for this study, you have to have amyloids, and you either have to have an intermediate level or an elevated level. And I was, hey, I won. I was at the top. I always like to be the top. So not necessarily in this.
Competitive in amyloid buildup is really just.
Yeah, I am so competitive.
Oh, man.
But anyway, what I then found, what the investigator asked is, did I want to find out my APOE? I did not have to find that out. And I said, yeah, give it to me. So she said, well, the good news is you have one APOE3, but you also have one APO4, APOE4. So that wasn't none of that was particularly good news. But then I had to make the decision: was I willing to go through the testing or the clinical trial? And I was. And what that involves is, starting last January, I go in every 2 weeks and have an infusion. The infusion, they have to do tests first to make sure things are going okay. They ask you a bunch of questions, but not always cognitive questions. Take your vital signs, take your weight, and then they call the investigator and say, is it okay if we order the drug for Ann? They order it. By the time it's brought up, it's usually another hour and a half later. It takes an hour to infuse, and then they have to watch you afterwards. And so the time shortens with the length of time you're in the study. But right now, I usually plan on being there for 4 hours, sometimes longer.
And so you've got the testing, you've got the infusion. What are they watching for after the infusion?
They're watching for hives, any type of an allergic reaction, any type of nausea, vomiting, headache,
Okay.
and I've had none of these things. So also every sixth visit, they take blood. What they're looking for, I can't tell you because I don't know. They won't tell me. They do an MRI, and the MRI, they're looking for side effects that you would not necessarily know about. That would be like microhemorrhages in your brain. Now, they just watch those. They don't really worry about those unless you start having symptoms. They also look for fluid on the brain. They also look for macrohemorrhages, so bigger hemorrhaging. That they would kind of take you off the study for just a little while just to watch that and make sure that you're doing okay. So all of my MRIs negative.
How do you not get uber anxious every time you go in? Well, maybe every time you have an MRI. I would be, please don't find anything, right? How do you manage you, Ann?
How do I manage me? And I think I've said this to several people, is that once I found out that I had this high propensity to develop Alzheimer's, is I do have a little black cloud up here. It's never far away from me, but it's how am I dealing with it? And that is, my husband and I love to travel. Unfortunately, COVID has come along and it's really kiboshed that. But we're just going to go. We're traveling. We have to travel. That's the love of both of our lives. I have, I know that I've been really good in my life about taking care of myself. I exercise. I have exercised, I think, since I was in my mid-20s. Reading, puzzles, eating correctly. I kind of follow the Mediterranean diet. I don't eat a lot of red meat. I eat a lot of fish. I eat a lot of chicken. I eat a lot of vegetables. I don't eat a lot of sweets, although I won't say that I don't, but I do eat,
Come on, no.
The one thing that I absolutely love and I will not give up that is part of the Mediterranean diet is cheese. I'm from Wisconsin.
Yes,
You gotta have your cheese. So, I don't follow the Mediterranean diet that way, but leafy green vegetables, legumes, all those kinds of things are really good for you. I said exercise, reading, getting like 7 to 8 hours of sleep a night, and that's where I fail miserably. I can't sleep that long. I will sleep. Like I said, I do my Wordle puzzle at 2:00 in the morning and send it off to my family. Good thing they have their iPhones off, because otherwise they get ding, 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 ding.
Doing Wordle again, guys. Oh boy.
No. I'll get off that. And I do crosswords every day, and I do word find every day. I'm not good at doing really difficult puzzles, but I think one of this fear that you have that every time you go, you misplace something. You're saying, "Oh my God, it's Alzheimer's." One thing I forgot to say is that when I received these results, I said, "Oh, that explains why I am so forgetful, or I can't remember somebody's names." And the investigator said, "And you've gone through lots of cognitive testing. You have no signs of Alzheimer's. You have signs that you're." Well, I'm 73 years old. Of course, we have signs of forgetfulness. But it doesn't matter, because now I still am aware that maybe this is a sign. I don't know.
So
hope that it isn't.
And if you could stay with that thought just for a little bit, because I know that I have experienced and have talked to many people who have as well. It's like the more we learn about Alzheimer's and dementia, the more anxious we come, the more we self-scrutinize, right? Am I forgetting more? Am I forgetting longer? The harder I try to remember something, the more elusive it is. Do you worry, or do you pre-plan for such a day when you know you're not?
Well, a good friend of mine said one time that, you worry about family taking care of you, but you're not worried about yourself. You won't know. Do you remember who that friend is? You. No, I mean, I worry about my family having to take care of me. And, I know they would not want to put me in a home, but they can. That's just fine because I know they're busy. I know they can't take care of me. And I don't want that burden to fall on them. So, hopefully everything I've done in my life is going to keep me from having it. And, hate to be morbid, but I certainly have outlived my family. So, I don't know. You never know. Tomorrow, you just don't know. So I'm hoping that I kind of don't outlive my possibility of getting Alzheimer's. I'm sorry. I don't want to get it.
Right.
And
Well, we have no control over that,
I
right?
know. But I think the hardest part that I saw with my dad with Alzheimer's was when he was at that midpoint, where he knew something was going on, but he, it was really hard on him because he was a highly intellectual person and he didn't understand, but he thought he was old. It just, how it is. If you've had anybody with Alzheimer's in your family, there's that midpoint where you wish that they would just lose their memory and not be able to deal with it anymore. So
I think that's universal for caregivers, right? Let's not say universally, but I know that when I was watching first dad and then mom, I thought, you know what? I don't know what to do for them.
mhm.
And I don't want to call attention to these things, but you have to pay attention because at some point they need intervention. And I remember being very preoccupied with wanting to maintain their self respect, their sense of self, while at the same time making sure they're safe. Now I listen to you and the work that you're doing through the study, and thank you, by the way, a million times for engaging in that work. How do you again, it's the question, how do you manage your anxiety? Because we know from what I've understood that anxiety makes the whole situation worse. How do you not be anxious when you're studying your brain and the possibility that you may end up like your dad?
I can get rid of that anxiety. My activity level is unbelievable. I went back to work a year and a half ago. You know, I'm just very active, like with the IEA. I'm on the board of visitors for the School of Nursing. I keep very active. So my mind is occupied so much. But if I'm sitting here alone or reading a book and having a hard time concentrating and keeping track of what's going on in the book, I worry. I'm anxious. I've seen too much of it. I don't want to be one of those people. But, like you said, I don't have any control of it except maybe this little selfish part of me that says, oh, this drug is going to help. And, it's going to eat away all those little amyloids in my brain. And I won't have to worry about it anymore. But yeah,
So,
it goes for 4 years.
okay, so that I was going to say, take us through what does that look like and what do you get at the end of your 4 years? Now, are you also staying with that longevity study you described?
Yeah.
So how do those interact and what are you looking to learn from both?
The longitudinal study that I'm in, I feel kind of silly going in for these yearly exams because obviously my cognitive skills are being tested continuously and my physical health is being tested continuously. But they don't want me to quit. I guess they just need to keep watching me. And that's basically it. Just keep watching me. And that's what they're doing. The other the AHEAD study is a little bit different because it's a 4-year commitment. I'm going to stick it out if there's any way I can. Thank goodness after 2 years, your visits go from every 2 weeks to every 4 weeks, so that's good. At the end of the study, they will tell you the results of the study, and they will tell you if you were in the placebo group or if you were in the, I guess I forgot to say that. I mean, I'm not necessarily getting the drug. I've got a 50-50 chance.
You know what? That alone would drive me nuts. Am I getting it? Am I not getting it? And what's happening? God bless you, Ann. I mean, it really is extraordinary when you think just about the time commitment, all of the studies that are being done on you, what a commitment that you are making to help us understand. I'm assuming, check me on this, I'm assuming that because this is a 4-year study, they will be noting, not necessarily telling you, but noting changes so that they're testing a theory, right?
Yep, they're testing a theory, hypothesis.
Yeah, and the hypothesis is that the amyloid plaques are important, that the tau tangles also are important, but we don't know how. Is that right? And that's what they're watching.
I think they understand that they also are usually present in people with, that they collect brains. Anyway, and so, those brains are looked at after people die. And they see if there's tau tangles, they see if there's amyloids in the brain. And that's kind of where they came up with these theories, is that, the people that have increased taus, people that have increased amyloids tend to have Alzheimer's.
So is the increased levels, is that kind of on a sliding scale? It's not you have none or you have a bunch. Is that kind of an accumulative thing, do you think?
I think that, for instance, if I'm getting the placebo, I would assume that my amyloid numbers are going up all the time. Do you think I want to look at the MR or the PET scan that showed those? Absolutely. I want to know how many, but elevated. So evidently there are some people that have none. And I assume that there are people that don't have an intermediate level. They're kind of in between that none and intermediate. They have a few hanging out here and there. It has to be that way.
So when we were dealing with mom and dad, there were 2 drugs basically that were prescribed, Aricept and Namenda.
Mm-hmm.
And then toward the end of mom's life, before we moved her, the neurologist that we took her to said they were working on one that actually combined those 2. Is that the idea of this new drug that you're part of? They're testing a drug, right, to see what happens.
Mm-hmm.
And is that the idea that this will be a new drug? Because Aricept and Namenda didn't change anything.
No, they didn't.
Hard progress. Yeah. But that's it. They're done with those?
Pretty much so. They have not had a new discovery that has helped Alzheimer's for 10 years, at least 10 years, might be 12 years now. And remember the drug that FDA approved that's like, what, $50,000 a year? I mean, it's just incredible how much it costs. And they approved it. Now, the drug that I'm taking or not taking is close to that, but it's got some little bit of different things. And I think hopefully by the time it's all tested and they decide, they obviously will find out whether it works or not. By the end of this, hopefully, and it's approved by the FDA, it won't cost that much. And that's my understanding, that it won't cost as much. So I know the other important thing is that you can't have any signs of, what they're trying to do is study this drug for people that have these high amyloids, that have, APOE genetic factors that are risky, but they want to test these factors and just, but they don't want you to have signs of Alzheimer's yet. That's absolutely, you have to be pre-clinically diagnosed with cognitive tests that would show that you have Alzheimer's.
Which
There's
makes
so much information, I forget stuff, I'm sorry.
Yeah, but that makes sense, right? If they're testing this hypothesis about the plaques and the tau tangles, you would guess that, well, but I was going to say, you would finish one sentence before you start another one. You would guess that the presence of the amyloids would be an indicator. However, you said early on in this conversation, just the mere presence of the amyloids does not indicate necessarily that there's cognitive decline, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so that's got to be part of what they're testing over this 4-year period. I also want to say thank you again, because when we read about these clinical trials that are going on in order to approve drugs, you're doing that.
Yeah. So that's my interest in research. But like I said, this is very selfish also, because, one of the things when I haven't had any of these side effects, I hope it's not because I'm not getting the drug, the study drug. I want to be getting the study drug. But maybe
if the study ends and they tell you that you were in the placebo group, would you want to take the drug?
Yes, I would. I mean, obviously, I would want to know that they found that it stops that you're not going to get Alzheimer's if you've taken this drug. And they should know that. That's why it's such a long study. If I would go through the entire study with the amount of amyloids I have and have no signs of Alzheimer's, that would be a real plus. That I would be one of those studied people that they say, oh, here's an example of somebody that didn't get it. So they take all that data that they get and decide, okay, this has helped. It's helped most of the people that have gotten the drug. So, obviously I said, not everybody that has amyloids gets Alzheimer's.
So I want to ask you now, as a caregiver, former caregiver, but let's say I'm taking care of someone who I'm seeing decline. Can I get them enrolled in a study? How can I support this research? How, as a caregiver now, right, dealing with someone, how can I apply what you're telling us to either help them or convince them to get involved in a study? What's that process like?
The process is basically you have to look for studies, and it's an active thing. I just was lucky because I was part of the IEA and heard about these studies. But really, NIH has clinicaltrials.gov, and you can look for all kinds of studies. You can look for Alzheimer's studies, and if the university is doing one, I know the university is doing a ton of trials. So and if anybody is interested, I know that that study is still taking applications. They don't have every spot filled. They're a little bit slow at getting people through the screening process, but because it takes a lot to get somebody to the point where they're actually on the drug. And I think I'm only maybe, oh gosh, last I knew I was only one of 3.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So I don't think they expect to get, I think they're hoping maybe they get 30 people. So it's pretty, yeah.
Could you get referred through a neurologist to a study like this?
You could. I'm sure that you could. It's not, people usually seek these things out. But yeah, I'm sure a neurologist, it's not, they could say there is a clinical trial, and then it's up to you to go. I mean, it's not that they refer you necessarily to a clinical trial, but they tell you if there's a clinical trial.
Okay, that's an important piece to understand. How do you access, right? If you want to raise your hand.
Yeah.
One last thing I want to talk to you quickly about, Ann, before we open it up to comments or questions or stories from our crew here tonight. You talked about a blood biomarker, a blood marker study. Is this what Sterling Johnson is doing?
it is what Sterling Johnson is doing, and they were approved to do the study, which is looking for a blood test that is fairly well developed at this point for Alzheimer's. But to test their hypotheses, they need some lab equipment that is very, very expensive. Now, the NIH will not pay for that equipment. So it is up to the University School of Medicine and Public Health, ADRC, IEA, to come up with those funds. So, if anybody wants to donate, it's a perfect, know that it will be well spent on something that will actually be testing the capability of diagnosing via blood.
And so am I understanding this correctly, that if, say, I go to LabCorp and I get this whole, my cholesterol and blah, 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 all these blood panels that they do, this would be just an additional test of the blood that they could say you have a high propensity for it, or you actually
I think it actually will show. And, Susan, I don't know, I'm sorry to say, I don't totally understand the science of it yet. But I think they are coming close to possibly pulling it. And I don't think it has to do with the APOE. I think it's actually diagnostic of Alzheimer's.
Can you imagine? That would be amazing.
Right. But I think also people would have to ask for it. They're not going to do that test on everybody. Some people don't want to know.
Yeah.
It will come back on my chart. Oh, you've got Alzheimer's. They don't want it to go that way. You would have to ask specifically for it. And that's a few years down the road, but it's on the horizon.
Well, and what's exciting to me about it, certainly again, Ann, thank you for joining us and hearing what it's like to be part of a study. The fact that this stuff is going on, and I think our job as the IAA Board of Visitors is to get this word out, because unless you're actively involved in caring for someone or thinking about it yourself, we know it's out there and we know people are getting older. We know it's a thing, but this really brings it close to home. And I love what you said about, making a donation for the equipment. What a cool thing to do in memory of a loved one, perhaps.
Yeah, perfect. Yeah. And, you can go on the UW School of Medicine and Public Health, their website, they have a place where to donate, and then you can donate it to the initiative to end Alzheimer's disease.
And can you specify that you want to help buy this lab equipment? It's interesting, and this is really maybe not a cool connection to make, but the university has this tremendous veterinary school where people who make donations all the time in memory of their pets. Why not do the same kind of idea? Obviously, far more meaningful. But to be part of a group of people who actually fund this equipment so that we can all benefit, I think is wonderful.
Right. Well, I've had so many people that have Alzheimer's. It's easy for me when I donate, in honor or in memory of.
Yeah. Lucia, thank you. She just put the link in the chat to the ADRC. So check that out. If you're interested, go find that, click on it. I'm going to come back to the end, and I always ask our chat guests to give us one last bit of advice or encouragement. But before we do that, I want to open it up to everyone who's with us tonight. Do you have a question? Do you have comments? Perhaps you want to say thank you, Ann, as I do. We'll open up the floor now.
Thank you.
You're welcome. You're welcome.
I had a couple questions, but every time I did, you just scooped them up and answered them.
That's the mental telepathy. I'm trying
Yes.
to keep my Alzheimer's brain active,
Yep.
Oh. No questions? I'm not putting you on the spot.
I do hope that link helped, because I noticed that there was events, and there is a place. So I sent the landing page where you can, there's sign up for a study, donate, volunteer, all this. So I thought there was a lot of brain donation. My goodness.
By the way, I did donate my brain.
I was just
You know
going
what
to
my son said?
say too. Yep.
He said, "Do they want it now, Mom?" Oh,
You're out of the will, kid. That's it.
right.
Yeah. So talk about that. You and I chatted about this earlier about actually donating the brain. And I've said for years, I've got to donate mine because I have these crazy dreams. How do you do that? Is it a legal thing?
Very easy. It sounds like it's on the ADRC site. You can donate your brain and they will interview you. They will ask you questions. And then if you agree to do it, you get little cards that you can give all your friends and relatives. Mine is on my refrigerator because they need the brain shortly after this is gross, I'm sorry, but they need the brain shortly after death. And so my family all knows they have to call this particular number. And then they will go to the hospital where, I passed away or wherever I'm at and get the brain.
Is that different from donating your body to the School of Medicine?
Yes.
It's a different program?
Yes.
Interesting.
Yeah. I wonder if anyway.
They have a 24-hour pager.
Yes. I said they want the information right away. So my brain's out of here, once I'm gone. So yeah, and one of the things, before I went into the study, before I totally agreed, I let my family know, my kids, I have 3 kids. I thought they needed to be aware that I was doing it, be in agreement that I was doing it. And did they want to know if I had the amyloids in my brain? Obviously it's pretty obvious if I'm going every 2 weeks for this study, but the intermediate, those people that have intermediate amyloids actually can be in a study, but they only have to go once every 4 weeks. For
what does that mean, Ann? What is that intermediate? What does that mean? That
means that they have more than none, less than elevated. It's absolutely, it's not normal amounts of amyloid. It's just intermediate. Kind of like middle school, I guess. I don't know how to describe it.
And you are in a special class, as always.
I'm in the special class.
Yeah.
Yes.
Other questions, comments, story before I ask Ann, our closer. Going once, going twice. Okay. And I always like to end our chats with a bit from your perspective, and you've seen it all, from being a caregiver to now being in these studies, understanding the research, knowing this incredible community of physicians and researchers and practitioners. Talk to us as caregivers who are anxious for our loved ones. What do you recommend we do, and what do you recommend we just leave alone?
Well, obviously make sure that your loved ones have all of their, everything in order. That's always a good thing. Don't ever blame yourself if you feel like you need to put them in a memory care unit. Don't feel that you have to be that responsible person who's going to take them into your home or you're going to be their sole provider. It's very few people that, boy, if they have that is incredible. But I don't expect that. I don't want my family to do that. Respect that person. Show them the respect that you have for them. Love them. Spend time with them. It might be things like, well, I told you, my dad, I brought Bob with me. That really pleased him. If they're still able to be taken places, take them places. They deserve attention and being able to go out, going to a movie, going for a car ride. That is one of the big things, and these are very simple things, but I think honestly, the biggest thing is to show them that you love them and don't feel guilty if you have to put them in a home. You just can't do that.
Well, and this, you've really just described compassion, haven't you? right? We need this human connection, even when we don't maybe understand how best to do it.
Mhm.
But there's no greater gift, and I believe this truly for caregivers, than to give yourself, your time, your care. Showing that you love and value and respect them is hard to do sometimes. No doubt about that. But truly, what each of us wants, and I always say, not always, but often say, let's not wait, right? Don't wait until somebody is suffering. Do it now.
Therefore, my husband and I going traveling, because that is, that's what's important to me, My family's important to me. I see them a lot, and I will continue seeing them a lot, but it's important for me to spoil me a little bit.
That's fantastic. And you've done the work of helping them know what to do with and about you should you travel that path. That's also a gift to them.
Yes, it is.
Wonderful. And thank you so much. And thank you all for joining us. It's just, these are extraordinary. I love our meetings every month. You can find this chat at susanamarshall.com along with the archive. Some of our guests here have been with us since March of 2021 when we started this. So thank you again for being here. And bless you. Thank you so much. We'll have to have you come back at the end of 4 years and tell us what you found out.
Oh, dear.
Mark your
I was like,
calendar.
blah, 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 blah. No, I don't know. I'm hoping. I'm going to keep doing all the things that they recommend: exercise, reading, puzzles, all those kinds of things. So.
Fantastic. And music. I understand music is awesome.
Oh, it is. And how could I not say that I'm a pianist? Oh, my goodness. Shame on me.
Have a wonderful evening, everybody. Bye-bye.